We have a lecture today, the second of the Yoga of Falling in Love cycle, and we remind you that my names are Tatiana Tatva and Anton Jiva. We are teachers of the Open Yoga School. All information is on the yogaclass.com website. There are free yoga courses, as well as paid teacher training in Russian and English. Today, we will read the next 7 aphorisms with comments by Vadim Valeryevich Zaporozhtsev.
And we continue to read aphorism number 8. Losing the seed, you lose everything, because there is nothing to compensate for your animal karma. You become empty, irritable, your mind is overshadowed, and you do suboptimal things. In the comment of Vadim Zaporozhtsev, this is a curtsy to the yoga of union. Unfortunately, it is hard to pay for having sex with improper handling of sexual energy. In women, this is the so-called monthly syndrome. As a rule, these are painful and unpleasant sensations associated with these monthly cycles. This is due to the fact that this energy awakens and begins to be spent, and as a result, the woman becomes irritable. She feels bad. This is the period when a woman has an increased potential in the mind, energy seems to flow out of her. She is like Mother Nature, which on the one hand gives us life, and on the other hand, takes away this life. Therefore, a woman during menstruation is more of an uncontrolled energy. More precisely, the energy is controlled in proportion to how much a woman does yoga. Ordinary women have this energy. As a rule, there is destruction, and everyone who is nearby falls into this area. And everything goes awry. But if a woman does yoga, if the degree of her awareness grows, then this same energy becomes the most powerful energy of creativity. And this woman begins to contribute to the luck of everyone around her. The practice of Tantra Yoga teaches a woman, first of all, to get rid of negativity, and secondly, she becomes a source of energy that overcomes death. Now with regard to men. After having sex, if a man does not practice according to the Tantra prescriptions, the man loses his seed. If it is not spent. If it is spent on conceiving a new life, then everything is fine. If it is wasted or too often, then a man experiences about the same sensations as a woman during menstruation. The universe gives us an excess of what we deserve. In our past life, we have done a lot of positive things and a lot of negative ones. Then we were born again, and we were given a little more positive than we deserved. As soon as we have spent this surplus, the positive, then the negative comes to the fore. That is, the negative is not related to the loss of energy. The negative is related to our previous negative karma.
Aphorism 9. Everything is achieved only by pleasure, nothing is achieved by suffering. So give up suffering. Asceticism is needed only in order to reach new heights of ecstatic pleasure. By itself, it is useless. Comment: enjoyment without negative consequences lifts you higher. But, unfortunately, there are few such pleasures. You can drink a glass of vodka and get pleasure, but the next day a hangover will come, and the negative feeling will override the positive feeling from the drunk glass. That is, as a result, there will be a minus suffering. The same applies to drugs and other types of pleasure with negative consequences. If a person practices yoga for a long time and persistently, his inner tone increases. He becomes cheerful and happy, thus rising higher and higher, and asceticism is needed only in order to achieve the highest pleasure later.
Aphorism 10. The pleasure you have experienced is just a faint glimmer of the highest ecstasy, samadhi. Give up dirty food, taste the nectar. Comment by Vadim Zaporozhtsev. Pleasure is inherent in us, it is our integral part, it is not an artificial thing. But there is no suffering in us. Our natural state is a state of happiness, joy, and enjoyment. But bad karma does not allow us to experience this state continuously. It seems to curtail the pleasure that is inherent in us. As a person experiences pleasure, he begins to move away from more petty pleasures. Because if you have experienced a higher level of pleasure, everything else becomes uninteresting to you. As long as you cling to a lower pleasure, then you block yourself from experiencing a higher pleasure.
Aphorism the 11th. If you rise above the ego level in pleasure, you will never return to suffering. Get over it. Comments. First, A few words about what the ego is. Ego is the identification of ourselves with what we are not. This is the definition of ignorance. Ego and ignorance are very close terms. We have chosen one small point from the entire infinite space of the universe and identified our transcendent self with this point. Moreover, we believe that this point is us. It's the ego. Everything that helps this point causes us positive emotions. Everything that hinders is negative. Everyone understands different things by this point. Someone, their physical body, an advanced philosopher, is more inclined to consider himself a mind. Someone is inclined to consider himself feelings, and an advanced philosopher identifies himself with a causal body. But all this is selfishness. We identify with what we are not. Everything in our life begins to revolve around this point. As we rise in our spiritual development, this point is somewhat blurred. A person spreads himself more widely than just a physical body. It's expanding, but it's still a kind of selfishness. We identify ourselves with something else. Yoga's concept of ego is not negative, but rather positive. Why? It was extremely necessary for us, thanks to the ego. We have taken the first steps in our development. With the help of the ego, we developed our intelligence, developed our abilities, and finally, with the help of the ego, we got a human body. But what was positive up to one point, starting from the level of a developed person, becomes negative. And what used to help us now begins to interfere with us. I'll give you an example: scaffolding and a house. To build a house, builders first erect scaffolding, then build a house. When the house is built, the scaffolding must be removed, otherwise they interfere. Similarly, the ego. While we are just developing, we desperately need an ego. We need a crystallization point in space. When you have already grown to the level of a person, the ego begins to slow you down, just as scaffolding is no longer needed. When you have built a building inside, if you don't fight with your ego, you will present a sad enough sight. Oddly enough, your success in yoga will be determined by the degree of overcoming your ego. Nature doesn't jump through the steps. Yoga will develop everything that was underdeveloped, and as soon as it develops, it will allow you to get rid of the ego. But getting rid of it is not so easy. This is truly a colossal work. This process can drag on for millions of lifetimes until you drop the ego. Tantra Yoga offers a faster method, outlined in this aphorism. If you rise above the ego level in pleasure, you will never return to suffering. Get over it. You have to understand such a thing, that you cling to something only if it brings you at least some share of pleasure. If you try something stronger in the degree of enjoyment, then you will separate from the lower one. In Tantra Yoga, such practices are given. If you are having sex, then you should make this process so that, according to the degree of pleasure, you are raised so high that you forget about both your physical body, your subtle mental, and, most importantly, your causal body. If you go higher for even a second, then you will still come back, but this connection with the body will become very weak, and it is no longer the body that will dictate its conditions to you, but you to it. That is why it is said that something valuable is achieved only by pleasure, and nothing is achieved by suffering.
Aphorism number 12. You're the sun, she's the moon. You're the moon, he's the sun. Microcosm and macrocosm. Like in like. Yoga binds you. Enjoy or observe pleasure, so you will realize yoga. Comment by Vadim Zaporozets. You remember that in our yoga school, everything is divided into two entities, energy and consciousness. Energy is a female principle, consciousness is a male principle. Everything you approach has this duality. At the intersection of this duality, what is called reality is born. Our world on a more mundane level has a male body, there is a female body. From the point of view of sensations, we can feel without analyzing or observe pleasure. That is, either to give ourselves up entirely to pleasure, or to rise up and see how our body enjoys. The point here is that there are two mutually exclusive approaches to experiencing reality. And only at the intersection of these approaches is this reality. You can increase the pleasure until you rise above the pleasure and begin to observe the pleasure as if from the outside. And you can, on the contrary, watching the pleasure from the side, immerse yourself in it. Example: you are in the arms of a passionate girl or a young man. You either experience, you give yourself up to feel, and as your feelings grow, you begin to understand that in direct proportion to your strength of sensations, you identify yourself less and less with what you identified with before. Suddenly, you will realize that you are everywhere in the universe. This state overshadows everything else in terms of the intensity of sensations. As soon as you have felt yourself to be everything, you will reach another point, you will disentangle yourself completely and start just observing. Then yoga will be realized. At the intersection of energy and consciousness of female and male, there is another feeling of like in like. You, your partner, at the moment of connection are a point, an exact copy of the rest of the world. All the processes that you carry out inside yourself, they immediately begin to be displayed throughout the universe. And what happens in the universe is displayed on you.
The 13th aphorism. If there is a desire, there is fulfillment. He will come. Don't strive excessively. Don't avoid excessively. So you will achieve the highest pleasure. How to thread a needle's eye. When there is no desire, what more can you want? Comment. This is another basic principle of Tantra Yoga. If you have a need for something or a desire for something, then at the same moment there is a way and an opportunity to satisfy it. This principle, that when a desire arises, there is an opportunity to satisfy it, is based on another principle, the so-called principle of enlightenment and balance of the universe, every moment of time and at every point in space. When you have formulated your desire, creative energy has been connected, which should fulfill this desire, but it is clear that our desires are rarely immediately fulfilled. Our karma interferes. As soon as we formulated the desire, the possibility of realization immediately arose, so that at any moment and in any place, everything would be enlightened and balanced in total. From this principle of balance, this principle arises that if you have a desire to eat an apple, then immediately someone has a desire to give this apple. And as passionately as you want to fulfill your desire, just as passionately that other side wants to give you the opportunity to realize. Realizing this principle, a person attains the same state as when relying on Ishvara, on God. A person begins to understand that God sees his desire and begins to fulfill it. And the fact that it doesn't happen right away is just his own picture. He understands that his karma stands in the way of fulfilling his desire, sometimes manifesting itself in time, and sometimes in removing obstacles on the way. That is, not in the attraction of desire, it will come anyway, but in the fact that you remove everything that gets in the way. Put two balls connected by an elastic band, which is very stretched. No effort is needed to bring them together. The gum itself will attract them to each other. But if there is a wall of our karma in the middle of these balls with an elastic band, then there is a need to eliminate this wall. The main emphasis in this aphorism is on the search for the second half, because all the wealth of this world, all the successes, all the power fades if a person is unhappy in his personal life. For a person, the main thing is to find his other half. If you are with your other half, then life is a success. If there is no other half, then if you are a billionaire 3 times, you will still be a poor man. Eliminate karma in the way of your other half, and it will come. Another thing is how to do it. This is a separate conversation. There are practices that are serious enough, that look like some kind of rituals, to eliminate these obstacles that prevent you from meeting. If a person has a need for love, a need for another person, whatever relationship you want, whether it's marital life or spiritual practice, you will get what you want. One attracts the other. This aphorism is very life-affirming. Do your best, and don't worry about what doesn't depend on you. Here, put your trust in Ishvara, in the higher powers, or in this law, the principle of enlightenment at every second, and at every point of space. Therefore, when you have a desire, catch yourself thinking that it is at this moment that the opportunity arises for you personally to satisfy this desire. Do not strive excessively. Do not avoid excessively. so you will achieve the highest pleasure. When you already have your object of love, an excessive desire to achieve something sometimes blocks the opportunity to realize there must be a middle way.
Aphorism number 14. You are always with him, you are always with her. In any love union, the highest opens. But while the elements are dirty, the channels are dirty, you can't see the sun like a blind man. Clear your understanding, tear the veil from your eyes, then any pleasure will lead to the ultimate goal. Comment by Vadim Zaporozets. You're always with him. How should this be understood? First, let's start with the axiomatics. You have what is called your consciousness. You are without a gender. I can address you to both a man and a woman. The conversion of you is an appeal to the soul. You, the soul, are always with him, with your consciousness. You, the soul, are always with her, with your energy. There is not a single moment in your life when you do not have consciousness and energy. This is a formal approach. The second approach, which we consider in 108 aphorisms of Tantra Yoga, is the relationship between a man and a woman. If you are a man and you are looking for your other half, a woman, if she is not with you physically, then she is present, in an invisible form. Until you are ready to meet her in the physical body, you will communicate with her in a subtle way. Also, every girl has her boyfriend. And if he is not physically around, then this communication takes place through a subtle level. The whole universe will manifest as him. The whole universe in this sense, according to Tantra, protects us. We want to meet our soulmate in a physical body, but when we meet, it often happens, we are often not ready for this meeting. We are capricious, not restrained, selfish and self-loving. So, if we meet our soulmate ahead of time, then we begin to torment her, because we have not yet matured. In Tantra Yoga, there are practices on how to eliminate all karmic obstacles so that your other half finds you. Or sooner or later, you will meet your other half anyway. But there are practices that greatly accelerate this process. But it's very dangerous if you haven't refined, cleaned yourself up yet. People meet, the first month is their honeymoon, and then comes the month of wormwood, as it is called. They begin to spoil each other's lives. And who is to blame? The one who gave them this practice is to blame. They would have lived alone for a few more years, remade themselves, become white and fluffy, and only then would they have met. And everything would have been wonderful for them. And since they met earlier, the karmic consequences fall on the head of this yoga teacher. Therefore, these practices are not particularly advertised, but you should remember from them that from the formal point of view, from which we started, there is no need to break down any wall. You are always with her or him, even if you are alone. If you have your girlfriend or your boyfriend, then your other half begins to shine very strongly through him. Now next. In a love union, the highest opens. The first comment is a formal comment. In our tradition, the word yoga is translated as a combination of consciousness and energy. When there is no difference between your consciousness and your energy. Example, I'm walking down the street. I see some picture that I don't want to see, which doesn't affect me. In theory, my energy should immediately connect and magically force the entire universe to eliminate everything that I don't like. This is the state when there is no difference between consciousness and energy. This is the state of highly advanced yogs. When there is no difference between the formulation and the fulfillment of your desire. From a higher level, this is when there is no difference between the Kundalini energy, located at the base of your body, and your consciousness located at the top of your head. They are separated by Sushumna. The task of yoga is to connect them. In the process of connection, you begin to receive great pleasure, unheard of pleasure, joy and happiness. When you finally connect consciousness and energy, you will leave this world or stay here, but you will be absolutely free. But as consciousness and energy unite, the highest happiness, the highest meaning, inexpressible in words, opens up. Now another formulation is more sensual. A young man and a girl in a love union, while pleasure stands out. This is the pleasure of disconnecting consciousness and energy, so the pleasure of sex contains all the spectra. But for a number of reasons, primarily pollution, we do not perceive this. Therefore, it is said that as long as the elements and channels are dirty, you cannot see the sun like a blind man. While a girl and a young man are in a love union, all the spectrum of energy passes through them, the highest ones. That could turn them into a god and a goddess in 1 second. But since their bodies are still polluted, they do not see this energy, they cannot concentrate on it. In Tantra Yoga, it is believed that having sex can lift a person to an incredible height. But everyone is engaged, but few people rise. The question is that they are engaged, firstly, unconsciously, and secondly, with very little involvement of energy. This is, firstly, the result of the unpreparedness of the physical body, and, secondly, the unpreparedness of the senses. Before experiencing the highest pleasure, one must go through very severe self-discipline and self-restraint. First, purify your senses, and then just let them taste these pleasures. If you have done everything correctly, if these pleasures are pure from the union of consciousness and energy, are not karmically conditioned. That is, when you receive pleasure, you do not accumulate negative karma, then every day you receive these pleasures. You will rise higher and higher in your spiritual development, your evolution will go faster. Sex in Tantra Yoga is fundamentally different from the sex that the rest of humanity is engaged in. This is primarily a conscious action, and this is the action that lifts a person. Then we go. Clear your understanding, tear the veil from your eyes. In a sense, we are made according to the same template, but everyone has their own veil of invisibility and dirt. Abilities do not need to be developed, they need to be discovered. They already are. They're just waiting for you to use them. And one last thing. Then any pleasure will lead to the ultimate goal. This is one of the most controversial moments in yoga practice. In Tantra Yoga, all sorts of exotic techniques are known, let's say up to the point that drinking wine made in a certain way will not only not throw you off the pedestal of yoga, but on the contrary will raise you higher. Part of the explanation given here is that if you have the right vector of motion, it doesn't matter what fuel is in your tank. You will fly in the right direction. Of course, the use of wine in yoga is not welcome, because ignorance can muddy the mind rather than open it. But even the pleasure of drinking a glass of alcoholic beverage is directed by a highly developed yogi to his spiritual development. This should be remembered. Any pleasure that you experience in life, if you perceive it consciously and direct it through the right channels, then it will lift you up. Again, if we consider a young man and a girl in a love union, then their entire spectrum of those that they pass through themselves leads to the final goal. Energy and consciousness can be connected in different ways.
This is where we end today. Next time we will continue and remind you that our name is Tatiana Tatova and Anton is alive. We are teachers of the Open Yoga School. All information is on the website experienceyogaclass.com. There are free yoga courses, as well as paid teacher training in Russian and English. That's it.
Bye-bye.
See you later.